Hi, everyone. It's the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. First of all, good afternoon. I'm glad you could all join us for our webinar, What's New in XAP and InsightEdge 12.3. Today we'll be covering how to simplify operations, accelerate fast data, and embrace the cloud with the latest InsightEdge 12.3 release. We will cover some of the new features and how they can contribute to your business. We will also hold a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. We have with us today product manager and lead system architect at GigaSpaces, Neve Ingberg, who will be presenting. I'm Nick Hand, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. It's important to note that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions throughout the duration of the webinar, please check the bottom of your screen. There's a button for Q&A, and you can enter in your questions, and we'll address them if time permits. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Neve. Neve, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Nick. So the agenda for today is first we're going to talk a bit about GigaSpaces, as we have a mixed audience of existing customers and new people who want to join along and see what we're all about. Next, we're going to talk a little about the difference between the InsightEdge platform and XAP, the in-memory data grid product. And then going to be the main part of the presentation, where we'll talk about what's new in the 12.3 release, which we released about 1 month ago. And finally, as Nick said, we'll have a Q&A session. So most enterprises today are talking about becoming InsightEdge-driven organizations, meaning that they can take the right action according to the insights derived from their data. However, recent studies reveal that only about 23% of those enterprises have actually managed to become data-driven. This means that 3/4 have failed. Excuse me. So this raises two questions. First of all, why do they want to become insight-driven in the first place? And the second one is, why are only 23% successful? So we can say that if the data is leveraged correctly, then the ROI is very, very clear. And beyond that, we can see that enhancing customer experience and optimizing operations both help the companies to gain the competitive edge that is so important for their business. So if the ROI is very clear, why are only so few companies successful? Well, the answer for that is that big data is extremely complex. And beyond that, real-time analytics is even more complex. And this is where GigaSpaces steps in. So GigaSpaces is about simplifying the complexity of big data analytics and letting our customers innovate with confidence. We do this with our two products. The first product is called XAP. It's an in-memory data grid. It's a very mature product that's being used and trusted by lots of companies, which you'll see some examples of later on. And the newer product is called InsightEdge. It's basically a superset of XAP, which adds Spark and analytics, where we already get a unified platform for both transactional and analytical operations. As you can see, we have hundreds of direct customers. We have lots of those customers are very large organizations. Because we're leveraging OEM and ISVs, we have thousands of installation bits. And if you look at our customers, you'll see that actually our first customers were mostly from the financial industry, but because the product is a generic platform and not finance specific, we've grown to other verticals as well, such as healthcare, telco, retail, transportation, and insurance. And again, because the product itself is generic, then it can be used in other verticals as well. Here's a select list of our customers. And you'll also notice in the bottom that we also have OEMs and ISVs and partners, which means that beyond the direct customers, we also have thousands of installations. So let's talk a bit about the product itself. So as I've said, the InsightEdge platform is an open source in-memory insight platform. It's actually built on top of the XAP, which is the in-memory data grid. So that means that we have two products, and you can choose from them which edition is right for you. And both of those products are released both as a open source edition under the Apache 2 license, or as a commercial edition, which you can try to download. You can download from the website with a 30 days trial license. If we take a look at the overall architecture, we see that this is actually a unified architecture for both XAP and InsightEdge. So we can see that XAP is indeed in the core, in the middle of InsightEdge, and it provides event processing using multiple data models such as POJOs or .NET or JSON, or even geospatial data. And that's based on a RAM or even hybrid models of RAM plus SSD storage or storage class memory, such as Intel 3D X-Point. And on top of that, you can create the application and microservices. And then on top of that, we've added the analytics and big data, which is InsightEdge itself. So that's basically a synergy between XAP and Spark, which provides streaming, machine learning, and all the goodies and stuff that Spark offers. And then we've integrated that with a Tableau using a JDBC connection. But you can, of course, plug in other visualizations as well, such as Apache Zeppelin. And all of that is available either in the cloud or on-premise, or as a hybrid using Docker and Kubernetes. So now we're ready to dive into the specific pillars of what's new in 12.3 itself. So we're focused on three things: simplicity and ease of use, big data and TCO reduction, and cloud nativeness and containerization. Here's a highlight of the features that we're going to cover in this presentation. Now, of course, beyond that features list, this is kind of the highlights. We've done lots of other improvements and bug fixes. The full list is available in our documentation. You can visit the 12.3 docs, see the what's new, and there's the release notes and see exactly what's been fixed and improved. So the first thing we want to talk about is customized caching for tiered storage. So the idea behind this is that the memory extend model, which serves as an extension of memory for SSD, has an inherent cache that stores some of the data in RAM. So the way that works is basically it's an LRU cache, and it serves, it looks at which data you query, and once you query the data and you get the results from the SSD, then you store the results in RAM. So if you query the same data over and over again, the next time you're going to serve the results from RAM without this access and get better performance. This is a pretty cool model. The only limitation about it is that it assumes the application access pattern is repetitive, and if the application pattern is random, then you might not get the hot data as the data that you want it to be. So what we've done in 12.3 is we added an API so you can configure using queries which are kind of like a SQL in syntax, and define which data you want to be cached explicitly in that cache, and which data should not be cached. And that gives you more control about so that the hot data remains hot indeed. And it puts you in control about what's hot and what's not. Let's take a look at how that would be configured. So here we see an example of how you'd configure a memory extend for SSD. And the white part is pre-12.3. And in the yellow, we see the new API that we've added. So for example, you can add a cache query to specify that you want to cache all the stocks whose prices are greater than 1,000, or maybe all the accounts whose rating is platinum, or again, that's up to you and your application model. And this configuration can be done both in code and in XML. If you're using the PU XML, have an equivalent for that, which is specified in docs. The next feature is memory footprint. This is kind of an epic of bounds a few improvements together. So the first improvement we've done is regarding index types. So up to now, we had two types of indexes. One was called basic, which is about equality. For example, as we've said, account type equals platinum. And the other type is extended. And in this case, we're indexing for both equality and comparison. For example, price is greater than X. The thing is, when you're using the extended index, you're kind of paying a double price, because we're creating an internal data structure both for equality and for ordered indexes. And we found out that some customers only care about ordered and want to avoid the cost of the equality. So now there are three new index types. One is called ordered, one is called equals, and one is called equals and ordered. And then you have a more finer way choice about how to index your data. And of course, the old indexes type of basic and extended are still supported. They're just annotated as deprecated to give you a heads up that you should upgrade your code, because it will be removed in a future version down the road. The next improvement is about replication. What we've noticed is that the way the replication mechanism works is that if a target like the mirror gets disconnected, then the replication redo log needs to capture all the data until the mirror reconnects, excuse me, so that it can sync the mirror once it reconnects. And in some cases, the user says that some of the data is relevant for the mirror and some of the data is transient and should not be replicated to the mirror. So up to 12.3, that data was still kept in the redo log and was only discarded once the mirror was reconnected, which is a bit of a waste. So now we've enhanced the replication to periodically scan the redo log and discard that data proactively. So this gives us actually two benefits. One is that we reduce the memory footprint in the scenarios where the mirror becomes disconnected. We only retain the data that is actually relevant for the mirror and not all the data. And the other improvement that you get from that is that you get higher stability because the redo log is now smaller, and it means that we can retain the redo log for longer periods or longer amounts of data. So we get a longer period before the mirror goes out of sync and has to restart the connection. Next, the next improvement we want to talk about is the new AlphaB storage driver for memory extend. In this case, instead of storing the data in SSD, we're storing the data in RAM, but AlphaB, which means outside the JVM. So the benefits from that are twice. First of all, we get a reduced memory footprint. The reason for that is that when we store the data outside the JVM, we can store it in a serialized manner, which means that it takes considerably less footprint. We've done some benchmarks of common use cases we've seen in our customers. We're seeing on average about 50% better footprint. This should be taken with a grain of salt because, as you know, those use cases tend to differ from customers to customer. So we expect some customers to see less than 50% and other customers to see more than 50%. And beyond that, you get a better performance, or it's more accurate to say actually more predictable performance. The reason for that is that if we store less data in the JVM, it means that there's less activity for the garbage collection, and there's less chance of spikes or stop the world scenarios, and overall your application becomes more stable and more predictable. And the final piece of information about memory extend is that we've enhanced the SSD storage driver to use AlphaB caching as well. So in this scenario, what happens is that up to now, the data was stored in SSD, and the index structures were maintained in JVM, so that when you executed the query, then most of the activity happened in the JVM itself, in the RAM, which is faster, and then only the specific pieces of data were being fetched from the disk. Now you can opt in to cache the indexed values in RAM as well. So this means that when you're executing a query with a projection, which needs only index data, then the results can be served directly from AlphaB RAM without any disk access, which is of course much, much faster. The next on the line is a new command line interface. So we've added a new command line. The main reason we've done that is that the old command line was based on the admin API, which is not cloud friendly. It requires open ports on the cloud, which is not an easy thing to do. And now that we have a new RESTful API, which we've added in previous 12x releases, we can, excuse me, implement a new cloud native CLI on top of it. In addition, this command line interface being new provides a unified user experience for both the InsightEdge product and the XAP product. So in fact, the XAP CLI offers a set of commands, and the InsightEdge CLI is a superset of those commands, plus commands which are InsightEdge specific. So the transitions from being a XAP user to an InsightEdge user become simpler. In addition to that, we've developed something new. So of course, the syntax is now more modern. If you're using tools like Git or Maven, which I'm sure you are, you'll find it very familiar. And we've chosen to adapt a user-friendly command structure. What this means is that the API is very, the CLI is very comfortable for users who are getting to learn the product. Let's see an example. So first, you can of course type a command like zap -- help, and this will print you a list of the available commands. For example, do you want to do something with a space or with a processing unit or host or container or something else? And then you'll say, okay, I want to do something about space. Let's say I want to deploy a space or see something about spaces. So I can do zap space -- help, and then it will give me all the space related commands. For example, deploy a space, list spaces, information about a specific space, etc. So now let's say I want to list the spaces. So I just type zap space list. This will print a list of all the deployed spaces. And now let's say I want to deploy a space, but I'm not sure which options or parameters I should use. So I type zap space deploy -- help. And then I get an information about all the space options I can use. So let's say I want to deploy a space called MySpace with 2 partitions. So as you can see, it's a pretty straightforward command. I can learn that from the zap space deploy help command. And then I want to see more information about the space I just deployed. I can type zap space info MySpace. This will print detailed information like JVM statistics, replication, data, etc. about the space I've just deployed. So of course, again, this is just a sample. It's very easy to experiment with this CLI interactively. And on top of that, we have online documentation, which shows all the commands and their various options. So the next thing we've done is we've added Docker support. So actually, Docker is something that we've been had unofficially with the product for the last few years as part of professional services or ad hoc implementation. But starting 12.3, we finally have official Docker support for both InsightEdge and Zap. By official, we mean that we have Docker images available at Docker Hub. You can just go to Docker Hub, search GigaSpaces, and you'll see our Docker images. There are 4 of them, 2 for InsightEdge, open source and commercial, and 2 for Zap, open source and commercial. And the Docker files themselves are also available at GitHub. So if you want to take our images and study them or extend them or do something else with them, that's a very easy thing to do. This Docker support is based on our new CLI and REST API, which I've just shown. So the commands for the Docker are basically the same commands for the CLI. And the README page in Docker Hub explains this and helps you get started. So what are some of the benefits of using Docker? Well, first of all, it's very easy to get started with the product. Instead of downloading Zap and installing it, you can just do a Docker pull GigaSpaces Zap and get started right away with no installation at all. The second thing is that it simplifies testing. So if you want to do complex system tests with entire clusters and test scenarios like disconnect or failover, or stuff like that, you can run those tests on a single machine, in fact, even on your own laptop. And then you can start and stop Docker instances and test the system behavior. This also helps you do more tests with less resources. In fact, this is exactly how we test our systems internally. All of our regression is based on Docker, and that's how we test disconnections as well. And finally, by using Docker, you're automatically cloud ready because storing a Docker on the cloud is just as easy as storing it on your own machine. And one more final note regarding the InsightEdge is that we now have a Spark 2.3 support in InsightEdge 12.3. Because we now have Spark as part of our package, we're very much committed to supporting the latest Spark. So Spark 2.3 is the latest edition. It was released in February 2018. And we've been released in April 2018. So we've, of course, made efforts to test Spark 2.3 and release it with our product. So if you want to upgrade to all this great new stuff, of course, you can do this yourself. In fact, 12.3 is very similar to all the 12.x release versions, and it's not complicated to upgrade by yourself. If you would like some support, we have professional services which can help you with that, as well as other activities, such as big data training or consultation or even staff augmentation. You're welcome to contact your GigaSpaces sales or a TAM account to get more information about that. And if you're interested in previous webinars we recorded, you can find them at gigaspaces.com/webinars. Here's a partial list. You're welcome to visit the website and learn about other interesting stuff. Okay, let's go back to Nick and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Neve. Yeah, quick reminder to the audience, if anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I see we already have a few questions coming in. So Neve, the first question is, can I limit the amount of off-heap memory which will be used? And can I monitor how much is actually being used at runtime?
Okay, so this is a very important issue, of course, because if you don't put any limits, then it means that the application may spiral out of control and consume all the memory, and then it will crash. So yes, you can configure in the space a parameter that says what's the maximum amount of memory. And beyond that, you can also track how much memory is actually being used at runtime. So the first thing is that you can see it with the web UI. It's just another column you can add, and just like you see the amount of Java memory being used, you can check the amount of AlphaB memory being used. And if you want to access it through an API, then we have metrics, an administration API, so you can use monitor how much memory through internal external tools like InfluxDB and Grafana, or write your own code to tap into those resources.
Okay, our next question is it possible to use memory extend with both SSD and off-heat memory?
Okay, so there's a few ways to look at this question. One thing is that one of the features I've shown does exactly that. So if you're using the AlphaB caching with SSD, you're in fact getting a tri-model so that some of the data is stored in RAM, some in SSD, and some is cached in AlphaB. But a more interesting thing to do would be to enable a memory extend with multiple drivers and not just one. And this is a feature that we don't have just yet, but it's on our shortlist for the next version. So this will enable you in the next release to configure both SSD and AlphaB side by side, and annotating your POJOs or your classes with information about, should I want this class to be stored in AlphaB or in SSD, or maybe even somewhere else, like the new stuff coming from Intel on storage class memory.
Okay, our next question is there any performance impact when using Docker?
Okay, so Docker is originally made mostly for, for isolating between processes, so you get safety and better control. This does indeed come at some performance cost, because it means that the Docker is running on a separate network by default. And if you have multiple GigaSpaces instances running in separate Docker nodes, then the communication is a bit slower because they have to go through an extra network hop. This is for development, for testing, this is not a pretty trivial issue. If you're in production and you want to squeeze the performance to the max, there's an option in Docker to modify the network model. It's called the net equals host. It's documented in our Docker README and documentation.
Okay, and our next question is, what's the licensing model for when using GigaSpaces Docker images?
Okay, that's actually pretty straightforward. We don't have a separate license model. It's the same one. So if you have a GigaSpaces license and you want to use Docker, you just add the license as an environment variable. Basically, zap-license equals the license you got from your sales account, or the trial license you download from the website. And that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Neve. And thank you all again for joining us for the webinar. We appreciate your time. As a reminder, all the materials from this webinar will be made available to you. And I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us, and we look forward to being in touch with you in the future. Take care.